Why would you want to make them believe that you're a girl? I mean, when you get there, it's going to be obvious that you're not.
I just remember seeing claw marks everywhere. It was gruesome. They didn't care.
The provocation section of the law talks about whether the victim's conduct could be sufficient to cause a loss of control.
You know you're asking for it when you do that.
By not disclosing that it is possible that a reasonable person could have reacted with a loss of control.
Mr. Solorio was arrested and booked.
Today is Trans Day of Remembrance. And while some people ask me in the comments why LGBTQ gets Pride Month as well as Trans Awareness Week as well as Trans Day of Remembrance, and then our veterans get one day out of the year, coincidentally, we are in Veterans Month. If you guys didn't know, November is Veterans Month. And I agree with the people that say our veterans do deserve more credit and more recognition. But when people push it further, because when I tell them that November is Veterans Month, they'll be like, but Pride Month is celebrated by corporations and our politicians mention Pride Month. Well, get in contact with corporations and get in contact with their legislators and find out why they don't make a bigger deal of Veterans Month. Because while I think they should, I wouldn't make a big deal if nobody made a big deal of Pride Month either. I personally feel Pride Month and Trans Awareness Week was meant more for the community than it was actually meant for the outside world. And especially when it comes to Trans Day of Remembrance, because if you don't know why we have a Trans Day of Remembrance, I will tell you. According to GLAAD, Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR, is an annual observance on November 20th that honors the memory of transgender people whose lives were lost in acts of anti-transgender violence. And this is one I do definitely understand, because up until recently, trans wasn't really a recognized thing as far as the general public went, or even as far as the police went. So in our community, we have lost quite a few people because there wasn't, in a lot of cases, a consequence to it. And the story I'm going to talk about today is one of those stories, even though the person appears to have been trans post-mortem, which is something I definitely don't agree with. But at the same time, I think this person is a perfect example of how little anybody used to actually care about the death of LGBT people, even if they were specifically gay. And while Trans Day of Remembrance is for anti-trans violence, I think it should be expanded out, or the meaning of it should be expanded out to trans people that we lost. Because when I was younger, there was also the fact that in a lot of cases, a lot of trans people had been disowned by their family. A lot of trans people had basically been tossed aside by society in general. And so we as a community are the only ones that are going to pay respects to these people, or going to remember them. And I know not everybody has had transsexual friends. I know not everybody's had that kind of bird's eye view into what the trans experience actually is. But for those of us that have, I think it is a very important part of what makes the community the community. Like, I have a friend that was absolutely legendary in the trans and drag world. Her name was Gigi Avantgard. And Gigi is one that I'll always feel bad about, and I'll always remember on Trans Day of Remembrance, because Gigi was sick. And I had no idea that Gigi was sick because Gigi hadn't told me she was actually sick. Gigi had told me that she had been dealing with walking pneumonia. And I've known people that have had walking pneumonia before, and they just recover usually. So it wasn't something that I saw as a particularly big deal. So what happened was, one day, Gigi was trying to call me, and I've always been really bad about answering my phone. This was before I did stand-up comedy, so it had to be about 2001 was when this was happening. And keep in mind that, like I said, up until just recently, there wasn't really a lot of support for trans people. And so Gigi, I was a part of her chosen family, and we had always been super cool. And I remember her leaving this message and telling me how she just really respected about me, that I didn't care about anybody's opinions, and that I was so strong, and that I really was able to block out a lot of the negative that comes with gay life and going to clubs, because that's where I knew Gigi from originally, was going to the club. She was from Hawaii, but she was living in Las Vegas when I actually met her. So she had called and left that message, and I really didn't think much of it, even though it was a very nice message. And I was like, that's cool. I'm glad Gigi understands my personality and the fact that I really don't care about a lot of people's opinions. I've just always been that way. So when people get mad at me on this platform or on X, a lot of times I'm just like, it happens. And so what happened was I didn't return Gigi's call. And then it was like the following day, Gigi tried to call me a couple of times, but I had been out partying and I was so hungover that I really didn't feel like being on the phone. And I hadn't realized Gigi was going through anything. I was at that time either living in Phoenix or staying in Phoenix. I don't really remember. But Gigi was living in Las Vegas still. And so I didn't return her call. And then maybe like a month later, I was talking to another one of my really close friends that's also trans, one of my best friends for years now. And I was like, hey, have you talked to Gigi lately? And she was like, baby, Gigi died. And then it clicked for me, because I asked her when Gigi had died, that Gigi had been trying to call me from the hospital. But I guess she didn't want to tell me that she was dying, or that she probably didn't have a good prognosis. And I'll always feel bad about that, but I still won't answer my phone. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, you guys. So I'm going to tell you guys a story that, like I said, does have to do with Trans Day of Remembrance. And one of the most, I guess, well-known at the time situations that relates to this from Phoenix, and how I ended up finding out that that was an actual thing, which really did surprise me, because I was hanging out at a club called Paco Paco. By the way, like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me on the algorithm. But I was hanging out at a club called Paco Paco, which was a Mexican club, well, Mexican themed gay bar here in Phoenix. And it was my regular spot, but I had been going back and forth to LA quite a bit and spending most of my time in LA because I had just started in stand-up. And I probably was about 2 years in, maybe 3 years into stand-up, because I think I started in 2002 and this happened in 2005. Wednesday nights was the regular drag show at Paco Paco's. I know drag isn't the most popular thing in the world right now, but Wednesday was their drag night. And if you've ever been to a gay Latino nightclub on drag night, you know that a lot of the queens do really heavy ballads, and they love to do the hand motions, and they cry sometimes, and like literally they'll cry. There's a lot of theatrics involved, not a lot of dancing. To tell you the truth, be 100% honest, whenever I'm at a Latino gay nightclub and they start doing a drag show, I always feel like, here we go with the ballads again. Not a fan. So this was one of those nights and everybody was crying. And even though this was a Latino gay nightclub and a lot of the patrons only spoke Spanish, and almost every one of the drag numbers was a song that was in Spanish, I began to catch on that everybody is really, really crying. And even in between, the host is crying. Seemed a little strange to me. And there's this one bartender that's a white guy that spoke Spanish, but he's definitely a white guy. And so he was the one that I would usually talk to when I would go there all the time back before I had left to LA, because for a minute I was a regular at this club. Absolutely loved this club. So I'm leaning up against the bar and all of a sudden I say, "Who died in here?" And that bartender, without skipping a beat, was like, "Delilah," in that gay tone. Delilah. I'll never forget it. And so then I was like, oh. There's not really supposed to be an answer to that, is what I thought in my head. And then I was like, what happened to Delilah? And then the bartender told me that Delilah had died in a hate crime. And he wasn't able to give me a lot of details because nobody had a lot of details. And at that time, I wasn't sure if Delilah was drag or trans, because Delilah had come from Yuma and had performed quite a bit in Mexicali. And while Delilah had lived in Phoenix for a while, according to all reports, our paths had never crossed. So I didn't actually know Delilah. So over the years, I did some research and was able to find out some information about Delilah, but it wasn't until just the other day that I really decided to read up on it and see what we could find. There was also a documentary that I watched that I'll link in the pinned comment if anybody wants to check that documentary out and see what it is I'm talking about as far as what the family went through. And two things are true to what I was saying in the beginning. One, Delilah wasn't actually trans. Delilah was a drag queen.
A drag queen?
And even according to Delilah's own friends, Delilah liked being a guy.
What he told me is that he really just liked dressing up as a girl. He liked being a guy. He just liked dressing up as a girl.
And the other thing I found out was that the family really had a hard time getting the police to actually take Delilah's death serious.
They didn't care. I honestly don't think they did their job.
And it really upset Mrs. Corrales. That's when she first got the inkling that the sheriff wasn't doing what they needed to be doing.
No creo. No creo como se vio todo al principio que yo quería estar push con los detectives y todo eso y nada, ya había hasta...
The person responsible also was not charged with the hate crime, and a lot of the underlying to do with it seemed to be the fact that since Delilah was a drag queen, and that according to the person who had done it, Delilah had not been honest in disclosing that she was a man in drag, so they were under the impression that Delilah was a woman, which nothing against Delilah, she was good at doing drag, but if you ask me, still looked like a man in drag. So I'm not really sure how this person was confused, but that was a part of why this person ended up getting a lighter sentence. And I also think all of this has something to do with the fact that it was really hard to find accurate information about this, and different places still have different stories. I'll read to you what the Transgender Day of Remembrance website actually says about the death of Delilah, and I'll also read to you what some of the details were that haven't been disclosed in a lot of places, but seem to have been confirmed by Delilah's family. So here's what Trans Day of Remembrance has. Amancio Delilah Corrales, age 23, May 6, 2005, Yuma, Arizona. Beaten and stabbed. Amancio died from what was described as authorities as violent trauma. He was beaten around the head and stabbed in the heart. Corrales performed as a female impersonator under the name Delilah. Apparently died from what was being described by authorities as violent trauma. According to the Yuma County Sheriff's Office, YCSO, Corrales was dressed as a female while visiting one or more local bars on the night of May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and that it was a significant possibility that he left with people who thought he was a woman. According to a website called gayindyuma.com, talk amongst the gay community there indicates the possibility that Corrales was killed by U.S. Marines. Eyewitness reports place Corrales at a bar called Ron's Place in Yuma. While dressed as a woman, it was reported that he was seen flirting with a U.S. Marine identified only as David. Patrons of the bar also said the man in question was furious when he found out Corrales was a male. Corrales was later seen leaving the bar in a silver Honda with the suspect and two other men who also appeared to be U.S. Marines. An unsubstantiated report indicates that 3 men took Corrales to a location near Paradise Cove. It was there, the following morning, that he was found dead submerged in the Colorado River. Corrales' family confirmed that he was stabbed in the heart and suffered severe trauma to the head. This act of violence must be properly investigated, said Michael H. Bowman, a spokesperson for the Amancio Project, a coalition of local and statewide organizations and concerned citizens. As a community, we must have respect for human life and treat all people with dignity. And that guy, Michael Bowman, was actually the one that made it his life's mission to kind of crack this case.
When we found out it was a cold case, then I really got upset and started working hard about finding who the murderer was.
and really helped the family to make sure that the sheriff's office in Yuma treated this with some sort of respect, because it appeared that they just kind of wanted to let it go.
The city wouldn't have anything to do with it. The county wouldn't have anything to do with it. In fact, they even sent out a letter, a memo, to all the supervisors and the councilmen. Do not get involved with this case, in bold, capital letters.
And he even talked about that he had at a point asked the sheriff about sensitivity training, and the sheriff like lunged at him. That's how much the sheriff was tired of him staying on him and trying to make sure that they were doing things the way that they were supposed to do them, and making sure that they followed everything according to the law.
So I started doing some research, and none of the officers at that time had had sensitivity training, which is mandated by law.
And even with that kind of pressure, it took them 2 years to solve this case, which I know some cases go completely unsolved, but I think a lot of this probably could have been helped out if local law enforcement had taken this a little more serious. I'm looking at you, Yuma, Arizona. And I did try to get even more details on this case, so I tried to get in contact with Michael Bowman, but unfortunately he died in March of 2013 at 70 years old. So all I have to go off of is the different reports that I was able to find and the little bit that I was able to get a hold of. And it leaves a lot of questions as far as whatever happened in the Marines, because in the end, there was only one guy convicted. But let me tell you some of the details of what they actually found, according to one report that, like I said, was confirmed by the family. So this article is from a couple weeks after the had actually happened, and these are the details that they were able to find. The Yuma Sun has few details. The site Gay in Yuma has details that don't appear in the newspaper article, which it claims were confirmed by Mr. Corrales' family. More below, but it's not for the squeamish. It appears that this was both a murder and a mutilation. Gay in Yuma gives these details. Eyewitness reports state that the 23-year-old Amancio Corrales, a Yuma native who most recently lived in Phoenix, was dressed as a woman on the night of May 7th at Ron's place in Yuma. So right there, the date is off, because Amancio was out Cinco de Mayo. Like I said, body was discovered on the 6th. So this saying the 7th is already inaccurate, but the rest are details that were reportedly confirmed by the family. I keep reminding you of that because it's pretty brutal, and I don't think the family would actually corroborate this if it hadn't actually been what happened. While dressed as a woman, it is reported that Corrales flirted with a well-known U.S. Marine named David. Eyewitnesses at the bar that night said David was furious when he found out Corrales was a man. Corrales was seen leaving the bar in a silver Honda with David and 2 other men whom appeared to be U.S. Marines. David and the 2 other men took Corrales to Paradise Cove, where later that night Corrales was found dead and mutilated. Corrales' family, who lives in Yuma, confirms Amancio's penis was cut off, his throat was slashed, and that Mr. Corrales suffered severe trauma to the head. And then it goes on to give information from the viewing, but then what follows is, the Yuma Sun article is here. As I said above, it has few details and none at all about Mr. Corrales' personal life. And so it goes on to say, a Yuma man was found in the Colorado River Friday. Amancio Corrales, 23, was found dead at 7 a.m. in the river about 500 yards west of Paradise Cove. We can't specifically release what killed him, but it was from violent trauma, said Major Leon Wilmot with the Yuma County Sheriff's Office. He said the murder likely occurred between midnight and early this morning. Sheriff's Captain Eben Bracker said the agency had to be vague because the investigation was ongoing. He did not have any further information about Corrales. And so those were the brutal details of what actually ended up happening. But like I said, at first the sheriff's department didn't really want to do anything about it and didn't really seem to care that much about it. And it just didn't make sense to me, because the way that the family and friends describe it, because they had gone to the scene of the crime and seen what it looked like, and according to them, it was absolutely brutal.
That one was a violent crime. It just looked pretty bad. To me, it did.
I just remember seeing claw marks everywhere, blood on the trees, on the leaves, on the dirt, everywhere.
It was gruesome. You could see the blood scattered on the rocks where you could see he tried to run.
And you would imagine that the sheriff's department, even if it was a gay person that it happened to, or a drag queen that it happened to, or a trans person that it happened to, would just want a person that's capable of that type of violence off of the streets and not to be a threat to public safety. But Michael Bowman decided to really put the pressure on them. And thank God he did, but we'll never really know what happened to Amancio Delilah Corrales when it comes down to it, because when I watched the documentary, none of Delilah's friends had said anything about this U.S. Marine named David or seeing Delilah leave in the silver Honda. What friends had reported was that Delilah was talking to a guy and they were clearly flirting.
All of a sudden we see Amancio come in with the guy. And he was right in front of the car, the lights were on, we were seeing the whole scene, we were watching everything. Amancio was like this in the fence, and the guy was with his arms like this too. And they were just talking and flirting with each other. And you know, I could tell that the guy wanted to hook up with him. And he looked at us and he's like, go, I'm gonna go with this guy.
And Delilah didn't want to go home alone. And so that guy and Delilah took off together, even though one of the girls that was hanging out with the group of gay friends didn't feel right about it and didn't feel like they should just let Delilah leave with this guy for no other reason than she just didn't think it seemed like a good idea.
But Patricia was all, no, why are we gonna let him go with the guy? What if something happens? We're like, oh, don't worry about it. And he does it all the time.
But one of the guys also said that they never tried to actually fool people into thinking that they were girls.
We wouldn't try to make them believe anything. I mean, why? You know? Why would you want to make them believe that you're a girl? I mean, that's, when you get there, it's going to be obvious that you're not. So, Amancio wasn't trying to make him believe he was a girl.
That they were very open about the fact that they were in drag or female impersonators was the way that they put it. And so for me, that also brings up the question of whether or not this was an actual thing or if it was just a defense, because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but this hasn't really been an uncommon theme with gay people or trans people and the people that will hook up with them back in the day when there was actual shame and social consequence involved with being gay, was that these people would hook up with gay, trans, and drag fully knowing what they were getting into.
There's a huge, lack of a better word, clientele that prefer a man dressed as a woman. And so he preferred that type of guy.
And then once they had completed the deed and had what a lot of us would refer to as post-nut clarity, then all of a sudden they'd become violent, I guess to kind of absolve themselves of what it was they just did and act like they didn't know. And it's unfortunate, but there will always be people in situations like this that think that the gay person does deserve it. Like, I remember when I was younger and hate crimes would happen to gay people, or gay people would be the victims of violence, because back then they didn't really consider them to be actual hate crimes. They just considered it something that happened. Like if you got what we would consider gay bashed, so getting beat up just for being gay, then a lot of people were like, well, if they didn't live that lifestyle, then people wouldn't treat them that way. This was very common when I was younger. And I don't think a lot of people that aren't gay or in some way related to the community or weren't back in those days fully understand how common that thinking was, and also how recent it was that people thought that that was excusable. I mean, this story was from 2005, so 20 years ago, and 20 years ago really isn't that long. And that's what people thought that gay people deserved for living that lifestyle. So then one day, Michael Bowman said that he was hanging out at a celebration of life or vigil that was being held on the anniversary of Amancio/Delilah's death, and somebody waved him over. And when he walked over to talk to that person told him that they actually knew who had done it.
And it had just been weighing on their conscience, eating and eating and eating at them.
And that they had the details. So what he did was he tried to talk the person, which he wouldn't give up any information about the person because he said he was worried for their safety. And they also were worried for their own safety. And so he tried to talk the person into going to the sheriff's office and giving them all the details that they had just given him. But the person wasn't comfortable with that. So what he did was he told the person to write a letter with a lot of details in it and mail it to not only the sheriff's department, but also to the family as well, so they could use that to really put pressure on the sheriff's office to actually investigate the claims in that particular letter. And that ended up leading them to a 25-year-old man by the name of Ruben Solorio Valenzuela, who was the man that was eventually convicted of Delilah's murder and got a much lighter sentence and a much lighter charge than I feel that he should have got. But it was also because public sentiment seemed to be that if Delilah was out there fooling guys, then that was something that they deserved.
All my relatives, I had the conversation with them, and several of them said, you know, they really couldn't blame Ruben. I mean, you know, they almost blamed Amancio, saying, you know, you're asking for it when you do that.
And so the judge didn't really feel like they could get not only the hate crime.
And I must accept the state's representation and the record I have in front of me that this is not a hate crime,
but also get them convicted. So he was offered a plea agreement. And this is what Ruben Solorio Valenzuela says happened according to the court records. According to court records, Solorio Valenzuela met Corrales, who was dressed as a woman, at a bar the night of the murder, and the two left together to engage in mutual, intimate physical contact. However, after several attempts to fondle Corrales, Solorio Valenzuela realized his mistake and then allegedly stabbed him.
3 different assaults took place. One was a physical battering with fists, and then Ruben at some point got a blunt instrument of some kind. And then, if that wasn't enough, at some point Ruben took out a knife. All this time, evidence does show that Amancio was trying to get away, and he slashed him multiple times. And the fatal blow was to the center of his chest into his heart. Once Amancio was dead, Ruben drug him to this little culvert and threw him over the edge into the water.
Prior to the sentencing, prosecutor Levi Gunderson spoke about the resolution of the case and why the charges were reduced and a plea agreement was reached. Gunderson expressed his concerns that if the case had gone to trial due to lack of solid evidence, there was a risk Solorio Valenzuela may not have been found guilty.
In this case, the grand jury decided that the appropriate charge was manslaughter.
He also stated the maximum sentence for the attempted manslaughter charge given in the plea bargain, which was 105 months, was only slightly less than the minimum sentence, 126 months, that Solorio Valenzuela could have received on a manslaughter charge given the weak evidence in the case had it gone to trial and the jury returned a guilty verdict. According to the facts of the case and the law, I believe the resolution is acceptable, Gunderson said. And even during the court case, the prosecutor Levi Gunderson actually said in so many words, it could be seen as the provocation by the victim, so Amancio being dressed in drag and fooling the guy could actually justify what this guy did.
The provocation section of the law talks about whether the victim's conduct could be sufficient to cause a loss of control. What matters is that the grand jury, looking at that, believed that that was the sort of thing that Amancio should have been open about, should have disclosed, and that by not disclosing that it is possible that a reasonable person could have reacted with a loss of control.
See, in that part I really don't get, because a loss of control, I guess I could kind of understand, but when you get angry enough that you stab a person several times, hit them over the head with something, and then also, according to the one report, had cut off his penis, that would seem to me to fall under a hate crime, but what do I know? I'm no lawyer. It just seems to me, though, that the way that this entire thing was handled from beginning to end gives you a pretty good idea of how little a lot of people actually care about the death of LGBT people or people that are considered to be freaks because they're doing drag or female impersonation or trans people as well. And to me, while I definitely do agree that that people should always disclose. It doesn't seem to me that murder should ever be the answer for that kind of thing, or that should ever be excused on any level. So at the end of the day, the guy ended up getting 8 years and 9 months of a sentence, 456 days credit for time served, I guess, while he was waiting to go to trial for it. So he likely ended up getting out when he was probably 31 or 32 years old, and still was able to live the rest of his life while Amancio is no longer with us. All of his friends are left to miss him. His family is absolutely heartbroken. And to me, it just doesn't seem like that should ever be an appropriate reaction or an appropriate punishment. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Sorry to bring this absolutely tragic story to you, but I did think that it was appropriate for Trans Day of Remembrance, since for a long time, this has been one of the stories that pops into my mind whenever Trans Day of Remembrance rolls around. And I ended up finding out that not only was Delilah not trans, but also in the end that person didn't get much of a punishment at all for taking Amancio's life. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. As always, thank you for watching. If you want to see a video of me talking about how Lily Tino may or may not be turning a corner, click the video on your screen. Other than that, this has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.